Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safety Desk. I'm Arisha Alif Khan, Chemical Safety Specialist at SDS Manager, your host. And today's episode is EHS 2026 Events and Predictions. Over the next hour, we'll break down the most important EHS compliance changes, regulatory deadlines, and strategies in 2026. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of industry experts. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Firstly, we have my co-host, Hans Christian, domain expert in chemical management at Chem Center. Then we have Andrew Smeagol, EHS manager at Plastipack. We have Juan Carlos, EHS lead at Otera. And finally, Vijay Atkins, founder and owner of Environmental Health Incorporated. So let's dive into it. I would like to start by asking you a simple question. As we start 2026, what change or challenge in the EHS sector do you think organizations will face the most? Let's start with Hans.
Thank you, Arisha. And first of all, thank you, everybody, for being on the panel today. It's very nice meeting all of you, and it's a privilege to be a co-host on this podcast, this meeting. But going back to your question, Arisha, as we enter the 2026, I believe the biggest challenge for organizations within HSNE is the regulatory acceleration combined with the increased complexity of data management, especially within chemical data and chemical management. So in Europe, we're seeing sort of a structural shift. It's not just about compliance toward regulations like REACH CLP. It's about data transparency as a whole, and being able to document it and having a systematic approach to it, and focusing on long-term risk reduction for all relevant stakeholders. So that's very interesting for the sort of HSNE perspective of 2026. So being able to adapt quickly is important, of course, and being able to have the structure and being able to hold on to your data in a systematical way, and having an operational process handling this data. That's very important for all parts within chemical management and all companies related to it. So for global manufacturers, this also creates alignment issues and challenges across regions. So for Plastipack's perspective as a US-based producer operating globally, Andrew, what change or challenge do you see organizations facing most this year?
So for this year, I see three kind of main areas, being technology, regulatory updates, and kind of a workforce skills gap that we're seeing here as folks retire. So on the technology side of things, AI is growing very rapidly. It's no longer a conversation piece. It's actionable these days. The challenge will be how do you allow them into workflows in a controlled and measurable way. On the regulatory side of things, we have hazard communication updates that are kicking in, kind of the chemical side of things this year. And in the US, we're anticipating some regulatory updates from OSHA on the heat stress and hopefully some lockout tagout updates, making it relevant to today's technology. On the environmental side, there's the increased EPA attention around forever chemicals, especially PFAS, with reporting and cleanup efforts that are shifting the focus from awareness to accountability. So that's kind of good to see. And then lastly, on that skilled workforce gap, as folks continue to retire and leave the organization, we got to develop better solutions to facilitate that knowledge transfer and prevent that tribal knowledge loss. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what I see challenges for 2026.
That's very interesting. We'll get into some of the things you've mentioned later on in this webinar. Juan Carlos, what about you? What is your opinion on this matter?
Challenging. Oh, first of all, thanks for joining. Thanks for inviting me for this panelist. I'm glad to meet you all of it. And for me, about the challenges, or what I'm seeing here in Europe is like the corporations are buying small companies, and these small companies are trying to. They're very far away from health and safety because of the mentality of saving money at whatever cost. So there are so many companies like mine. We are trying to push health and safety for companies who have over 40 years or 50 years of history of no health and safety. And that change is a little bit expensive, cost, and most of it is changing the mindset of the people. This is my challenge that I'm receiving right now. But on the other hand, there is an opportunity because the corporations that are buying this kind of companies, it's not the first time I work in this environment. They are investing big bucks in the change, in the safety culture change.
Oh, thank you very much. You're very right about that. Finally, Vijay, what about your opinions on this?
Well, thank you. I want to say thank you to you, Arsha and Hans, and
You're welcome.
it's really an honor to be here. I just want you to know that. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak today. You're going to be expected to do more with less. Not an uncommon theme, but that is fortunately something that technology is going to be able to help with. As you see AI go through mass adoption, last year it was estimated that many of the Fortune 500 companies were at 51% using video analytics and sensors and Internet of Things. And I think what you're going to see is that expanding to 60 to 70%. And as we go forward, things will happen that will allow us to do more with less. And for example, I can see a time when video analytics identify a spill and reroute foot traffic through the factory and deploy a robot to go clean up the spill. And that's all going to be happening. And coupled with the forthrightness, I'll say, of the and data-driven analytics that'll be in the regulations. For example, Andrew was talking about OSHA making hazard communication standard changes that they've been pushed back, and we'll talk about that, but still there's a lot coming at us.
True, technology advancement is very rapid currently. So thank you for your insight in this matter. So for the first portion of our webinar, we will be discussing EHS regulatory landscape. You have all mentioned a bit about the regulatory landscape in your speech currently. So we're going to be talking about what's changing in 2026. So on the US side, we're seeing OSHA's hazard communication, as Andrew has mentioned, updates and a stronger push on training, labeling, and documentation enforcement. So I'd like to know from Andrew and Vijay, when you look at those changes, what's going to create the biggest day-to-day impact for companies right now? Let's start with Andrew.
Yeah, I think the biggest day-to-day impacts will shift to more granular data management and targeted employee training. The generic awareness training, kind of the off-the-shelf training, so to speak, is not going to be sufficient any longer. Companies are going to have to tailor their training to be specific to the chemicals that are handled on site, their storage requirements, the incompatibilities, and their site-specific exposures. Organizations are also going to need a process for reviewing these updated safety data sheets and communicating those relevant changes out to the workforce. It's going to be very important as those things come out. Labeling is going to be a big piece. I think we'll talk about labeling quite a bit, especially for secondary containers and particularly those small volume bottles. It's going to be an issue for all of us. So it's going to require a lot of auditing and reinforcement to maintain that. So I don't know, BJ, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. Manufacturers, importers, and distributors basically have 60 days by May 19th. You're going to be forced to update your systems, your training systems, go through your labeling processes, make sure they're up to date, and focus on small containers, less than or equal to 100 milliliters, or less than or equal to 3 milliliters. And it's a new landscape, so you've got to pay attention and be out in front of it.
That's very interesting thoughts you have there. In Europe, we also have similar sort of changes happening, but we're seeing an ongoing movement around CLP and REACH updates, complicating the chemical management in many ways, but it's a big and important improvements. But it creates a lot of pressure on the chemical data quality for the producers. and tighter expectations around supply chain transparency. So that's very interesting thoughts. In regards to that, Juan Carlos, from your perspective, what's the biggest practical shift for companies operating out of EU and Spain?
Well, for me, my part as a not chemical producer but chemical user as a company, we don't produce chemical, but we use them. One of the things that is changed right now here in Spain and probably from Europe, because all the European rules come from, and then it comes to locally to Spain, is waste. You are not. I am now responsible for destroying the chemical waste, and for me it was a big shock because I was like, I handle it and I hired a third party to handle the chemical, but now I'm responsible that he really destroys it, but it is out of my factory, it is out of my control. So now I'm thinking, how I am going to make sure this guy destroys it if this is already out of my, but now I'm responsible for it as well. So this is a big change for me as a safety producer. Waste, chemical waste.
That's very interesting to know. We'll dive into that later on. So let's talk about something that spans across all regions, almost related to every sector of chemicals, CMR. So we're seeing regulations tighten the full chain, how hazards are classified and communicated, how worker exposure is controlled, and which uses are being restricted. Especially more restrictions are happening now. So in the US, we've got OSHA's HASCOM updates and EPA's TSCA risk management actions happening in parallel. Which one is creating the bigger operational burden for manufacturers in 2026? Updating SDS labels or training, or meeting stricter control or phase outs on certain chemicals? Which do you think is impacting your day-to-day life experiences the most, Andrew?
Operationally, I think the more immediate burden in 2026 will be updating the labels and the retraining of the employees to align with the revised EHS standards. For manufacturers, particularly those operating under food grade requirements, such as my company, that chemical selection is already very restricted for us, which reduces our exposure. However, staying on top of that, updated classifications, labels, and training requirements is going to require constant attention, especially this year as these things roll out. That being said, don't lose sight of the chemical phase out or the stricter controls if your company has concerns or if they're dealing with a specialized chemical. Have a backup plan and start engaging with those vendors and suppliers now. So, BJ?
Yeah, the hazard communication standard changes are focusing on labeling, updates, and retraining. I tend to agree with you. And this newer small containers requirements that we talked about, that's going to be labor intensive. And you have to start thinking about how you're going to get from where you are to where you need to be. And time is short. May 19th coming right up. Every one of the 4 deadlines have been slid back 4 months. Still, if you don't start soon, you're going to get caught short. So pay attention to what's going on with hazard communication standard and then GHS and stay abreast of it.
In Europe, we're seeing movement through CMR workplace exposure rules and reach restrictions tied to classification. Where do you believe, Juan, EU companies are focused on right now? Workplace exposure, products restrictions, or proving compliance across supply chain?
Probably compliance is such a big deal at the moment in supply. I can tell you one example last week. In here, I don't have the data sheet of some of the chemical products that I have, and I was like, why I don't have it? And they say, oh no, the distributor comes outside of Europe, so they don't come in the local language. And I was like, this is very important for me that my workers know dealing with, and they are just using some marker to know what they do. And I like, so now I have to do it, but according to the law, and probably this changes that now we are talking, the distributor has also to provide me in the local language. PJ is laughing probably because he's in the local language. It has to come. I saw it last week and I would do it myself, but it is responsibility of the distributor, no matter where they come from, and at least in here in Europe.
That's very true. The distribution is very important in this process, especially when it goes down the chain. So I'd like to ask all of you right now. So for a company that works globally, what is the smartest way do you think is to manage a CMR risk? Andrew?
So hopefully we have a process, or your company has a process, but I'd say the best thing to do is to know your company's chemical approval process and make sure that it is followed. Does that process have call outs for CMR risk? How do we elevate those if we identify those? And then ensuring that you're holding your contractors and vendors that come on site to the same standards and limit what they bring on site. I think sometimes that's a risk point that we lose sight of or we often forget about. I think the other thing here is that this should not be just a safety or an EHS person's responsibility. We have to involve all, business units, whether it's operations, quality, maintenance. We all have a vested interest together, so we got to make sure that we're looking at it through the same lens. If your company doesn't have a process or a plan in place, we should start working on one. A strong and well-documented process will help manage and limit that risk. So I think that's how we need to look at that as an organization. BJ, how would you manage the risk?
Yeah, you have to first know exactly what you're dealing with, what your company and your supply chain, what you're bringing in, control that, understand that, and be sure that you understand where the potential exposures are, so that you don't end up with a CMR directive problem. So understand your supply chain, understand who's working with what, make sure they're up to speed on what the SDS says, and enable them to protect themselves. And then, as you need to, use industrial hygienists to document that exposure.
What do you believe, Juan?
There are two ways to do it that I have tried to do it in the past. One was to try to the question is to how do you globally comply as a multinational company? So one of the things we did once was try to get the most restricted country and try to get this as a standard. So we complied to all of it, but it was a mess because some countries has very strict regulations because of very specific situations. So we ended up not. What we did was to hire a platform which actually give us with the articles of the legislation. So it is a sort of sorted by country. So we assess it, the local teams assess it by country. So in that case, we try to, the first thing was assess it, and then we know what's 85%, how can I say, compliant, 90%, and then we have an action plan. That's what we did in the past. With the first approach, we didn't have success. The second was more efficient, but you have to keep in mind that there are some countries, especially I was talking about Bangladesh or specifically Vietnam, which it didn't have regulation in for or data in internet. We have to do it manually. So this platform was doing it for months to do this compliance platform. Let's call it checklist, but it was a very long checklist. This is how I did it.
That's very interesting. I think there's been some very strong and relevant points that being brought up on how to manage CMR risks within a company, and especially how it is managed within sort of global companies that has to work over different regions, and the challenges of that. So mentioning chemical approval and involving multiple stakeholders that are relevant for the chemical management process within a company, it's very important. And having information on the different regulations related to the different regions is very, very important. But whether you focus starts with workplace exposure or product restrictions or supply chain transparency, as was mentioned in the question, I think one underlying challenge and that needs to be focused on is that you have consistency and control of the data within your company, and being able to maintain that data in a good way. So having a good chemical management system and following that up in the daily operation is central. in a way. And I want to also mention that with new chemical management systems, you also bring in AI, as was mentioned previously, helping you to perform processes that was previously manually operated, with the difficulties that introduced. I would say please follow up on using chemical management systems in a good way. Without a structured chemical management system, global CMR risk quickly becomes fragmented and sort of passively accepted if you don't have control of what you have in your inventory. So yeah, Arisha, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. All of your insights have been really valuable. All of the insights or your experiences that you spoke about address different parts of the whole process. But I believe one thing was certain here, that awareness, consistency, and knowing the risks is the main thing here. So from there, I would like to ask another question, that from your experiences, what do you think is the first thing a manufacturer should audit in Q1? Would it be their hazardous chemical inventory, supplier details and updates, exposure monitoring, or SDS or label consistency? What is the first one would you target in the first quarter? Andrew?
So from my standpoint, I think the hazardous chemical inventory is the best place to start. From a control standpoint, inventory accuracy is key. A thorough chemical inventory verifies what is physically on site and will establish that baseline for all the rest of the compliance activities that need to happen after that. If you feel you have a good understanding of what's on your site, I would go with the SDSs next to make sure that they're all up to date. Make sure that we have a safety data sheet for all of those chemicals on site. And then lastly, labeling. I think labeling is a big thing that has to be audited on, and make sure that we're up to speed on labeling. BJ, where would you start?
Well, I would agree with you, because time is short, and the labeling updates are going to be labor intensive. You better start on that as well. So understand your inventory first, and then get to business on updating those labels, because it's going to take some time and a lot of effort.
Those small bottles, like you were saying, those 100 milliliters or less are going to be really critical. They're going to be hard to get those labels on with all the information that they want.
Yeah. And there are certain exemptions, but familiarize yourself with those. They're there for a reason, and it's interesting time. You're literally going to have to do more and more with less and less. AI to the rescue.
What do you think, Juan?
What would I do with the first thing I do in a new plant is, as Andrew mentioned, know what I have, know what this compatibility has, because there are some chemicals that they cannot be compatible. Labeling, I'm seeing in the US they are very scared of labeling, but we have been standardized for. Hans can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have in this labeling for over a decade for sure. So we're now old or used to it. But there are changes evidently, and there are new lists every year. But I know all the pictograms, we call it in here. But one of the things that I do at the first thing is to know what I have, know they can be compatible or incompatible. In here we call it, and separate them. And know what are my storage rooms, my temporary storage chemical rooms, and know my emergency plan. At the very last, which also, but no less important, to know the PPE, so the company, this how to use it and where to use it. Another thing that I would like to share with you guys is the truck drivers who deliver this kind of chemical. They are not following the safety procedure, so you have to take care of them as well, and they are supposed to be the experts. So another thing to take care of, we call it transportist, but the truck drivers, they are supposed to be the experts, but in here they are not. So another thing to follow. I don't know, BJ was so laughing about me. I think he is in the field, and I remind him about him being in the field.
Kind of counterintuitive, truck drivers being an expert. They just, it just doesn't follow.
Pardon? What do you mean?
Well, the truck drivers are supposed to have a clear understanding of what they're transporting,
Yeah,
but
they
I
are
don't
not
even
aware.
know that they've been trained, and I don't know that they even understand what an SDS is. So, I don't think you can jump to that conclusion. And I think
I
that's why you
understand.
find it funny.
I found it funny because yeah, I found it funny because I was, oh, you are supposed to, and when I talk to them, I'm like, you know what to do? Yes, I have this on my hand, the PP. You are supposed to
Yeah.
wear it, but they are not conscious. They are not aware of this.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with them, but I care about them and I train them and I force them to do it the correct way.
Well,
I'm
I
not
guess
trying to
training is
denigrate,
key here.
I'm not trying to denigrate truck drivers. They're great.
And
They're great.
they're brave.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you're on a right track here, Arisha, on sort of training is key to communicate hazards related to chemicals and how to handle it. That's important for everybody, everybody that uses chemicals and also people that are, so to say, transporting it as well. It's very important to handle every scenario with managing the chemicals. And I couldn't agree more on sort of what's been brought up here on topics related to where to start on Q1 for chemical management. This is sort of my field, and what I like best is sort of the chemical inventory and the management system around it. So hearing you guys talk about this being sort of the priority of Q1, that's lovely to hear. Because the chemical inventory, that's sort of the foundation of the chemical management system. You need to keep track of what you have and see that you don't have anything that is outdated, either sort of the chemical itself, the physical chemical, if that is outdated, or the documentation related to it, if that's sort of on date as well, if it's classified according to what it's going to be classified like. And in relations to that, I will also mention of what's been brought up here as well. Communicating hazard and risk related to using that chemical is very important. So all kind of hazard and risk communication documentation that you have in a chemical management system is also important, even if it's a risk report or if it's a label that you put on a secondary container of a chemical. Very important. So that's something I fully support on evaluating and looking into in Q1. So that's sort of wrapping up what's been said by most of you. So that's I very much agree on that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Hans. Thank you, all of you. I do agree with everyone that we should always start with our chemical inventory. And if we have our chemical inventory, our labels, our SDSs, everything updated in the first quarter, it gets easier along the rest of the year, especially during audits and reporting times. So, ending to that part of our webinar, let's move on to the next topic for discussion, the 2026 EHS compliance calendar. Missing a deadline is still one of the fastest ways to create a regulatory risk. It's one of the things people dread, but it's one thing that keeps the whole system in check for most organizations, if not all organizations. In the US, a big one, the EPCRA Tier 2, is due right around the corner in 1st of March each year for applicable facilities. Andrew, what do you believe is the best way to prepare for it?
Well, this is probably easier said than done, but I believe the best way
Yeah.
to prepare for that is, shifting that mindset from a last minute rush to try and be proactive and put some sort of structure in place. I think maintaining organized records and creating kind of a repository for your prior submissions is crucial as well. We talked about losing some of that knowledge or that tribal knowledge, so that'll be helpful for anybody new into a role. Set reminders early. I try and do things 30 to 60 days in advance to allow time for completion. Just don't wait until the last minute. Lean on others for help and don't be afraid to ask for help. It takes all of us to get all these things done throughout the year. And lastly, I'd say just communicate, send the email, pick up the phone, seek out that person or group, but most importantly, follow up. Never assume that things are done just because you send that email or you left a voicemail. Just do that extra effort to follow up.
What about you, Vijay?
Yeah, Tier 2 reporting and emergency planning and Community Right to Know Act is upon us. Sunday is March 1st. So you basically have until Friday, this Friday. So if you haven't already worked on it, you're probably screwed. Sorry, but
True.
you know, and you Andrew's right. If you can get into that proactive mode and do this 30, 60, even 180 days in advance and have all your stuff in order, life becomes a lot easier if you're not putting out fires. And so you have to focus on that, because March 1st, that means Friday the 28th, you're probably going to have to submit. And in California, it's a little different because we have a system in place. The locals have a whole reporting system that manages that. But if you're across the US, you better pay attention to your inventories and understand whether Tier 2 reporting is required.
That's very true. February being a 28-day month really doesn't help with the deadline.
Yeah.
So across Europe, there aren't many single deadlines that apply to every company like in the US, but there are common regulatory cycles like the twice yearly SVHC candidate list updates under REACH and the ongoing PCN UFI notification requirements and annual emissions reporting for facilities under the EU ETS. But in some regions, there are similar must-hit reporting cycles too. For example, in Norway, companies producing or importing hazardous chemicals have an annual reporting deadline to the Norwegian Product Register, and for the 2025 quantities, the deadline is March 15, 2026. That is also right around the corner. Am I correct, Han?
No, you're totally correct, Arisha, both on the EU regulations related to going to a sort of more periodic compliance instead of due dates that we're following. So as you mentioned, the candidate list, the SVHC list, was just recently updated now in February. So that goes sort of on, that might be once or twice or 3 times a year getting updated, depends on the processes within the EU. So you have to continuously look at what kind of processes are ongoing and then follow those. So there aren't that many due dates that we follow up on. But as you mentioned, in Norway, we have some due dates on some reportings that needs to go in. We have a product register where all sort of big volumes that is used within companies needs to be reported in each year to keep the track of that. So in Europe, compliance management is really about tracking both the EU regulatory developments as a whole and follow up national reporting calendars simultaneously. And there are in Spain, and now correct me if I'm wrong, Juan Carlos, but there's a PRTR reporting that follows a structure, a timeline. It's a sort of a EU regulatory input. And there you have the regulatory authorities submitting validated data within summer is June 30th, I think, and then let's see if my research is correct. Then the national government follows that up the next year by reporting that into the EU itself, March 31st for the previous calendar year. I hope that was sort of broadly correct, so you have to correct me if I was wrong. But from a company perspective, and your thoughts on it, what's the most efficient way of staying aligned on timelines like this with due dates without creating last-minute pressure on the operations?
Thanks for asking. You are correct. Fortunately for me, the dates lining here are basically the same, the 28th of the last day of February and the 21st of March. So I don't have every beginning of the year. I know that I have problems with the environment or with is a chemical reporting. As Andrew mentioned, one of the things is be proactive. One of the things that I learned in the beginning of my career was to every month I have to report this to the group, not to the government, but I have to collect this data. In the beginning, I was like collecting every month, and then at the end of the year, I was looking for all these emails, and I was like, "Oh, this is madness." But then I learned that if I collect this every month and I keep it in a safety sheet in an Excel file, I will have it for this, and I will have all the documentation in a file. So because of my company because of sustainability, makes me report it every month. I have this data monthly. So at the end of the year, I just have to and classify it, and I have to report it, and it's easy done. But there are some corrections that have to be done. But that is, as Andrew said, plan ahead and ask by email and follow up on importantly. But what I did was reporting every month, and then what I do is actually I do it and I add it up, and makes it easier. I already submitted all of it.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. I think keeping track of everything every month really helps the process. As both Andrew and BJ has mentioned, staying ahead 60 days, 180 days, just staying ahead of it all makes it easier than avoiding last minute stresses. So beyond formal deadlines, 2026 also includes like global safety observances, internal milestones within organizations, and training refresh cycles, SDS update, emergency response drill, and of course, audits. So, what would you say is the best practice you recommend for avoiding last minute compliance stress before an audit? Andrew?
Again, I'm a big fan of being ahead of the curve, as proactive as you can be. I think sets you up for success. Regular reminders and really defined ownership really helps reduce that stress and improve consistency of the data. I use a compliance calendar with a minimum of 30-day triggers. Some of them are farther out, as BJ mentioned. I think the farther out ahead it sets you up for success. This allows us to stay ahead of the deadlines while ensuring enough time to complete. I did this in a homemade Excel spreadsheet, very similar to what Juan was just mentioning. So that's worked very well for us. So just being as much ahead of the curve as you can. BJ, do you have a best practice?
I started my career in environmental in the 1970s, way before most of you were born. So I didn't have the benefit of the computers and the technology that exists. So what worked for me and what was a best practice at the beginning of the year is we'd put a year at a glance calendar on the wall and put a master compliance calendar together. You can do that with technology now, but I still go analog sometimes and just put it on the wall, and I know what I've got to deal with. And you can start planning your year, planning your vacations and everything around what you've got to get done. And it's a best practice. That coupled with compliance inspections and follow-up auditing, it keeps you out in front of all this. And non-compliance, what people remember in our field is when you're in non-compliance. That's it. So focus on documenting compliance.
Yes, and what about you, Juan?
I think BJ, I couldn't agree more with BJ, and people in here in the factory, they laughed at me. So I want to share with you, this is an agenda, and they say 2026, as you can read, and I keep an agenda even nowadays, and there people are laughing at me. Oh, you can use Outlook, and I don't care about Outlook. I have paper. This is my approach, but a piece of advice that I could recommend you, but don't share it with anybody, is to do the same every year. For instance, but that's why I say this is my circuit, because every May I have a safety drill, emergency drill. So, but I can't share it with everybody, because otherwise they will know that these are safety drills in May. Every July I have a heat measure. I have to measure the heat. I don't know, because it's too warm in here because of summer. So in July I have to wear it. I have to measure it. So every year I have things like this. Oh, in March I have to do this. In April I have to do. In May I have to do safety drill. In July I have to do. In December I have to do because of the frozen, because it's cold temperature. I don't know how to call it in English, but the temperature measurements for
Yeah.
the workers to be
Yeah.
safe. So my piece of advice would be do every year, like the same calendar, January, February. So, but don't share it with everybody, because otherwise they will know when you have to audit. If you have to audit your plan, so do it every August or every, I don't know, you planned. That's it.
Yeah, some nice thoughts around this topic. I would say so. That's I totally agree. Sort of being proactive in the chemical management is very important. And from my side, sort of a best practice is to sort of keep chemical management as part of your daily operations and involve all relevant employees and stakeholders. So it's not just a topic for the HS&E department to solve it. That's an important thing. So we've talked about, sort of discussed the EPCR Tier 2 and regulatory cycles within the EU and national reporting and everything. But the important part, I would say, that is sort of have a continuously focus on chemical management and include it with everybody that needs this kind of information and needs to be a part of taking decisions that are involved chemical management as well. So we talked about chemical inventory, SDS quality and label quality, and that information. It involves a lot of employees, and they need to be involved, and it needs to be part of the daily focus, I would say. So that's sort of my thought on the best practice and focus for 2026 is working systematically with chemical management, I would say. But it's been a very interesting topic, and it's very interesting to discuss this. But now we're continuing on to the next topic, emerging trends within EHS.
Yes. So let's move on into trends and predictions for 2026. So one topic that keeps coming up across industries and region is something that Andrew has mentioned before, is PFAS, or also known as the forever chemicals. And it's shifting fast from just awareness to action right now. So from the US side, what's driving PFAS actions most right now in regulation, customer pressure, or the internal risk management? What would you say, Andrew?
I would say it's a combination of regulation and then the internal risk management side of things. The EPA is shifting focus and increasing the pressure. Some states within the US have enacted laws, placed bans, and are implementing reporting requirements as it relates to the PFAS and consumer goods. At the same time, organizations, I think, are evaluating brand protection, litigation exposure, and the long-term remediation cost. I mean, the cost to clean up some of these sites is going to be very expensive. I think you're also going to see some pressure coming from the insurance side of things. They're going to start applying that pressure as they look to transfer that risk for anything that they're carrying. I'm sure we're going to continue to hear more information on this as this important topic evolves and more groups take action. So, BJ, what do you think?
Yeah, PFAS is going to be a big part of our future. It's already well advanced, and there are starting at about 4,700, and I've heard as high as 16 million different species of PFAS and PFOA. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I agree with you. The primary driver are the regulations. That always gets everyone's attention. But customer pressure is secondary. I'll put it in a think of a car. The main engine is the regulatory pressure, and the accelerator is the customer pressure, and the steering wheel is the internal risk management. And if you don't have a steering wheel, things get expensive real fast because you just are everywhere. So think of it that way. You're going to be driven into this set of regulations. It's already started, and customer pressure is going to layer on responsibilities. And if you haven't got a board of directors that's giving you a steering wheel and guiding the process to some degree in terms of internal risk management, you're going to be chasing yourself around. So put together a plan and recognize that PFAS is here to stay. Hence forever chemicals.
Absolutely. That's PFAS. It's a bit scary, I would say. So yeah, but Juan, in Europe, especially Spain, where are you seeing the biggest pressure now regarding this topic? Is it product restrictions, reporting expectations, or is it any thoughts on supply chain transparency, or what's your thought on that?
I'm just still getting the idea of the car of Vijay. Was a very good example. I just love it. Regulatory would be the first thing, but one of the things that is trading is the customers. They are pushing in. I could tell you 2 examples this week. Just this week, Nestlé is asking me for an audit, and it is mandatory for every supplier of Nestlé. It has to have this audit or this certification. And it pushes us to do the right way, and it gives me an example or an excuse to go to the directors and tell, oh, you have to do it, otherwise we are not going to sell to Nestlé. And you can see all smaller companies. I was saying, oh, Nestlé is a big name or whatever, but there are some local companies that they are starting asking, oh, do you not have something about sustainability? And they are giving on some questions, very difficult questions, like, you are so small to be asking these questions, but they are pushing me. And then I said, oh, next year, I know what's coming. Next year, you're going to ask for a certification. So it is pushing. The customers are pushing, and a very good idea. Laughing again a bit, and it is a good excuse and a good opportunity to make the directors invest some money in the compliance, for real.
That's very true. All your opinions kind of match with each other. So Hans, now it's your turn. When PFAs become a requirement change, what breaks first inside a company? Chemical inventory, supplier data, or product documentation like SDS and labels? What would you say?
My view on that is that maybe supplier data and product info, they're a bit related in many cases, and sort of that is maybe
True.
the biggest challenge. And from that side, sort of the info related to the information that is communicated later on is that quickly cascades into everything else. So a challenge with PFAS, as BJ mentioned, it's not just a single substance that you can identify with a CAS number all the time. Sometimes they're mentioned in product descriptions or SDSs with CAS numbers, or sometimes they are mentioned just as a product group, and that product group may have different names based on what the supplier describes them as. So that makes the communication for PFAS a bit tricky to handle and tricky to identify as a company or as an employee. So for companies to answer the question, do we have PFAS in our products? It's not that simple because of the information related to the supply chain info and product info in the SDSs. PFAS is used in many ways within the industry. So it may be part of the impurities or polymers or components in articles that is mentioned in safety data sheets. But they're not always in high enough concentration to be mentioned in the safety data sheets for them to be classified. So that also creates challenges. So with the unclear data and it's tricky to be proactive in this case, I would say. Yeah, that's sort of my thoughts around this. Yeah.
I do agree with you there. but as Vijay has mentioned, that it's coming, PFAS is coming and is going to stay. So right now, companies should concentrate on how to handle this better, because right now, as you said, we know a certain number of PFAS out there, and we can expect that there will be more that's coming. So alignment within SDSS, labeling, classification, our chemical inventories has to be on top of everything. So that's it, what I wanted to ask about PFAS. So let's connect this to another topic that we have spoken briefly about before, is CMR, chemicals which are carcinogens, mutagens, and reproductive toxins. We are seeing in 2026 there is an increased pressure on not just PFAS, but CMR as well, not in case of compliance, but being able to control it. So when it comes to CMR, what do you think is the biggest challenge here? This is my question to all of you and up for discussion. Number one is keeping your SDSS labels and classifications up to date, meeting exposure control expectations, or managing restrictions and customer requirements. Which one of these is your biggest challenge? Andrew?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead,
I think
Vijay.
you've nailed it. One,
Okay,
two,
sure.
three. Keeping SDS's labels and classifications up to date, that's probably going to be the primary work effort. That's probably the most important thing, followed by meeting those exposure control expectations. And finally, managing the restrictions and the bans and any customer requirements that might come up. That's the order in which I would proceed.
Yeah, I agree. I think maintaining a system that is going to continually review those regulatory updates and integrates that into the training and documentation process, it's going to be essential, like you just mentioned. That being said, we'll pay attention and be on the lookout for any chemical restrictions or the feedback from our customers. I think that's going to be the next big thing, is that feedback and the questionnaires and audits, and maybe even these certifications that Juan was mentioning.
What about you, Juan?
Okay.
Oh,
I think the hardest
I get
thing
so eager,
over
so you jump in. Juan, sorry.
I think the hardest thing would be the exposed controls. In my experience, what we did when we have a cancer-regional or a mutagenic is I don't buy it. I try as much as I don't buy it, I don't use it. But if I have to use it, it is always in here. It is very hard to work with them. The exposed controls are very difficult to handle in here. In hygiene, industrial hygiene, it is very. For me, it is the labeling is once you label it, then you know it. When the people know how to use it, know what they are, but then the restriction of the daily value on the minimum requirement or the maximum requirement per day or per short amount of time, I don't know, the 15 minutes we call it in here. So it is very hard to manage. For me, what I have a cancer-regional or a next to be, because there are in here we have another list which is it is on a study that is going to be a mutagenic or a cancer-regional. So we know that it's coming in the next year, or maybe it's going to be rejected, but we try to avoid these products. Try to avoid it as much as you can, because the exposed controls are just going stronger and harder and harder to meet for me, according to my experience. Get how can I say, get a substitute.
I totally agree, and that's why I wanted to jump in as well. I agree with you, Juan. Sort of being exposure control being maybe the most difficult one to handle. And in Norway, we have additional documentation needed for work with CMR products, where every worker has to report in every time they work with CMR products.
How long they have been working?
Yes, how long? So it's a whole process just to be able to work with CMR products. So it's that itself is very tricky. So you need to be able to demonstrate that sort of exposure is minimized to its minimum, and that you're able to control the risk with it. And that is, of course, very important. It's extremely important, and you need to be able to document so substitution assessment of the CMR products. So it creates a lot of additional processes and management to work with CMR products within EU and in Norway, as we see here. So it's not just about hazard control for us, it's a lot of additional processes being added to chemical management while working with these products.
Yes, I believe what both you and Juan has mentioned is sort of related to the hierarchy of controls. If there's a CMR, we want to eliminate it first, and then if we can't eliminate it, we substitute it. If we cannot substitute it, we have our controls in place. And if we can't do that, the last line of defense comes to PPE. Your insights on this were very valuable, and I believe our viewers would benefit from this discussion to see how everyone from different regions, we have Norway, we have Spain, we have the US, how are handling things. Now, let's bring it down into reality. I would love each of you to share one real world situation you've dealt with recently that has taught you an important lesson in EHS and what has helped you overcome that challenge. Your solutions could help someone else learn. So let's start with Andrew.
Yeah, so as we kind of conclude this compliance reporting season, as I like to call it, with the Tier 2 reports on the US side of things due here very shortly, starting early and just assigning clear ownership and having has made a measurable difference for us across our organization. Having structured systems, communicating expectations, confirming that tasks were done, that's really helped us be successful. Took me a long time to learn to ask for help, share that workload, and really, I think most importantly, in all honesty, empowering others to be successful. That's been the key to our success, and I'm still working on all of those personally. But if I can recommend anything, and just create a system that works for you and build trust amongst your peers. Whether it's an analog, paper version on the wall, like BJ mentioned, or Juan, I'm laughing. I have my book with me too, where I take my notes still. I'm still old school, even in my young age of loving technology. So create a system that works for you.
BJ?
I haven't shared this, but at one point in my career, I was an elected official in the water industry. And I took my environmental background and I was helping make policy decisions for about 300,000 people. And that agency decided to spend $8 million, this is 6 years ago, $8 million stripping PFAS from the drinking water system. And I admonished them at that time. I said, hey, you're getting, the regulation isn't even in place. And it's going to be 16,000 or 16 million. The number of species of PFAS and PFOA is such a huge number. You're going to open your checkbook here. So what I learned was understand exactly what your end game is and what you're dealing with, the size of the problem you're dealing with before you start to open your checkbook. And if you can get there, and it has a lot to do with what your compliance requirements are. So Andrew's right, but understand the whole picture. What is the goal? And try and control costs and do more with less. That's what we're all faced with, and it's a challenge. So I admire the youth and vitality of my colleagues here, and it's it makes me feel good about the future. Keep working, guys.
Juan?
I want to be specific if you guys allow me.
Of course, of course.
One of the things that I learned was safety culture is the most important thing because it reduces 90% of the accident just with the mindset. But then the question is in the how, because how do you improve a safety culture? And this is going to sound really bad, but I learned it the hard way. And there are two ways to improve quickly the safety culture, and I learn it and I do it in every company I join. The first, and this is the sad, is with a fatality, or with a very high potential incident, or a person dying. It makes you the safety culture improve right away. Then the second one is what we can do is to teach the leadership team or the directors the consequences of not following the health and safety rules. So what I do every time I join to a company is I hired an external, a lawyer, and I tell them, you need to tell them that every person who has a team, I don't know, I think in the US they call it white collar. Every person who has a team has to know that if they don't follow and if a person dies or a person has a very strong accident, they can go to jail with the real examples. I listen here in Spain and I know in the US as well. And it has to be on a strong message. And believe it or not, it helps you a lot. For instance, I just joined this company 2 months ago, and I already did this training. Today was the last session. And the maintenance manager and the production manager, they were scared of, literally scared of, they didn't know this, they have these legal consequences. And now they are now following and hearing me more. So this is what I think worked the most for me and was the piece of advice that I follow. And I think it works very well. And I thank BJ for the piece of advice to understand the whole picture before paying. It would be good. I now I'm thinking maybe the solution is smaller than you think when you think about the root cause. I'm not talking about accidents, but sometimes small solutions and cheaper solutions are better, and you don't need to spend more money on that. And one of the things that I get from this webinar is that sometimes it's not the most expensive. It's just the easier on the simplest one. Thank you for that, BJ.
Yes. Yeah, looking over what we've discussed a bit, this is sort of clearly that the regulatory pressure in all regions, they're accelerating and getting more complex, and the sort of deadlines, they will continue. Restrictions, they will expand. Definitions like PFAS, they will evolve both regulatory and as a chemical group, so it will get more complex within chemical management. And as I'm fond of notebooks myself, but I would like also to encourage to use digital tools to be efficient in your chemical management. Take a look at how you could be more efficient with handling, using AI and automizing processes, and being thus, helping yourself and helping all your employees on how chemical management can be improved within your company.
Thank you, Hans. I believe we have a bit of mix of things, but both you have said that the small things, keeping notebooks, can help you in a personal level. But I believe digital systems, softwares, and platforms can help in an organizational and broader level than personal level. So I agree with both. While you yourself have to be clear of your own goals and what you need to do within the year, your organization also has to be clear with your goals and be aligned with what you have to do for the year. So before we close, we would like to open the floor to a few questions from our audience. If you're joining live, feel free to drop your questions into the chat and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the next few minutes. Let's see if our audience has any questions.
One under Q&A.
Oh, we have a question from Daud Manzoor. And two people here. First, let's address number one. For teams with limited resources, what should be the number one priority in 2026? Who would like to answer this question?
I don't mind taking that one on. I think for there, I would do focused on a risk-based prioritization, trying to identify those top 3 to 5 whether it be hazards or issues for you, and focus on those. Don't waste time on just doing low impact activities. Focus on what's really going to make a difference for your organization. Focus on the risk.
Thank you. I think that would help. The second question we have is, how do you think AI will change the safety culture? Who would like to answer that?
I can start out. If you want to go first, BJ, you can go first, and I'll follow up.
Well, it's just, this advent of Internet of Things and the sensors that are being developed now. I mean, you're going to have real time, the ability to in real time understand what exposures actually are occurring on the floor, and you're going to be able to control the environment. And I mean, I can see a day when, like I was talking about the robot cleaning up a spill, but if somebody's being exposed to something that they shouldn't be, or the exposure concentration is building in an area, you can direct people away from it, and it'll all be automatic. You can set up systems that AI can control that will protect people's lives. It will save people's lives.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And introducing AI to the organization will be a huge benefit in many ways, both as you will remove manual processes, as you mentioned, BJ, where robots and AI can help us interpret a situation and reduce risk and improve safety of our workers. That's highly beneficial. But also in sort of the chemical management processes as well, where you want to communicate risk and hazard, then AI may help you on that, and removing manual labor on working on a computer as well, being more efficient. But I would also mention that it also introduces a risk with AI into our organization, because you need to be able to handle the risk of bad data going into AI. So that's also something to be aware of for the upcoming AI revolution.
AI revolution. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I also do believe. Yes, go ahead.
One things that we are currently working on it is I know health and safety doesn't match sometimes with process safety, but in here there is no process safety specialist, so I have to give them a hand. So I think we have a product now that at least AI that is reading all the data from the chemical reactors, and there's a project that is coming. So the decisions are going to be easier for the operator. So way faster with all this enormous amount of data, because in my company we only see the color, but now we will have pressure, temperature, what's going on inside, and the decision will be on the AI, or at least in the beginning, at least it's going to be the operator with more information, but we're going to train it to be more precise. And in previous work that I did was some of a sorting company, and they will do it a manual work with the sorting with the color, but the color was very similar. It was white and another white, but with this machine with AI, it did it automatically, and the worker was just a simple sorting, so way faster, easier, and safer, because it was so much dusty environment. So AI is already here, I can tell you, and for me, I have seen it, and it is it's giving us a good impact.
So in shorter words, AI is going to have a positive impact on safety culture from all of your answers. Okay, so our next question: what's the most common compliance mistake companies make going into a new year?
I'll jump in. Staying in reactive mode and not doing proactive things, like putting together your compliance calendar and understanding what you're looking at. And your job is to pay attention to what the regulations are, what changes are happening, and what your deadlines are, and not planning for that, not planning early enough and getting started. You have limited resources and you have to get there from here, and not understanding what the goals should be. That's the one main compliance mistake I've seen.
Thank you. I agree with you there. Anyone else want to give your opinion on this?
I think in my current company is not knowing the legislation. And when I joined, it's like, oh, do you have a system or is a lawyer I can talk to? They were not doing it right. We're in the process of hiring a platform to give us the regulatory, how can I say it? At least the list what we have to have. So because we don't know, we all know the legislation, the total legislation. So one of the things is that sometimes it just comes the fine or what we have to pay, but we didn't even know what's this legislation. Or I can tell you a few. But this is with a platform. Knowing the law would be good with a platform or with a digital I don't know, website or whatever.
Okay, thank you. I think we have good answers for that question. Our next question is, do you believe will digital EHS platforms completely replace manual compliance processes? Your opinions on that?
Yeah, I can jump in. From the side of sort of developing one of these EHS platforms, I work mainly for a chemical solution system, Chem Center, and our goal is to almost to say yes to that question. But of course, it is something that we sort of look into, and how efficient and how optimized can it be. Of course, we need people doing important evaluations within a system like that, but everything that can be optimized should be optimized, in our opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyone
I would
else?
want to. Yeah, I would just want to say there. I think it's going to be a combination of both. I think technology is going to enhance and bring those efficiencies that we were talking about, but at the end of the day, I think there's still going to be a need for the old school pen and paper, and some of that manual process. We're never going to move completely away from that. AI will help automate things. Technology will make things more efficient, but at the end of the day, sometimes pen and paper is still going to be needed.
Any more thoughts on that? I think we have the answer to that question. So our next question is, how can we educate the team members about safety culture at root level, especially the team members who are not very tech savvy? I think Andrew's opinions from the last one comes into this. So would you like to start?
Sure. At the root level, I think you just got to really start talking safety and having those conversations directly. Getting folks involved, I think, is a really good way to get that culture going, getting them active in the safety program. But it's got to start from that supervisory level, and having that peer-to-peer discussion amongst each other, I think, is how you build that safety culture and get folks at the root.
If you
Yes.
don't mind, I can answer also.
Of course. More opinions, the better.
Well, my trend for this 2026 and probably the next year is going to be a more human behavior, a more human touch in health and safety, which, for instance, is not about how do you how these people, they are not enemies, or they're just not trained or not here enough. So, for instance, in here we have, or the global have, safety walks. Is some companies they call it Gemba walks, or I don't know, Gembos. Here we with the plan manager, we're doing something different. We are gonna call it, and it's coming soon. We call "Cause I Love You." In English, in Spanish, you're gonna yeah. Does it have the impact? So
Yeah.
and it's gonna be with a little, how can I say, a little card, and I'm not blaming you. I am not complaining about anything I'm just saying, because I love you, please wear your safety goggles. If you don't want it, it's all right. But because I love you, I'm reminding you. So it's not about they want to follow the rules. And they say, oh, because this guy is very close to, how can I say, to jubilation, to get a pension. I say, oh, it's all right. They are the most, they have invested the most amount of time into working, so they are maybe the most invested into a safe retirement. So people want to change, people want to be safe. Just do it in a human way. And I think this program is going to be really good. And in a way, how do you communicate, especially the supervisor and the leadership team? It's not about telling, for instance, in here in the beginning was the quality was telling me, do this, do that. And I don't say to my employees, don't do that. You said, I'm teaching them, because I love you, you should do this. This is the right way. I'm teaching you. This is job between you and me. There is a small register because I have to register safety walks for sure, but I change it my way. And I think it's going to be a good change. In some other companies, it has already worked and it's been proven. This is the way that you get the root guys.
I think that's a very sweet way to handle things. And as what you said, the human touch, your answer had it definitely. BJ, what were you saying?
EHS managers are kind of the technical folks. Generally, they're regarded almost like engineers. But when it comes to the line workers, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, which is exactly what Juan Carlos was saying. If you can show that you have compassion for them and you're interested in their safety, you're interested in them going home and being with their kids that night, that's going to go a long way to build that safety culture that Juan Carlos is aspiring to.
I believe that as well. So moving on to our next question, what are the hidden costs of non-compliance beyond fines? I think that's a very interesting question. What's your take, guys?
Well, you've developed a brand and you've spent millions generally if you're a Fortune 500 company trying to develop a brand, and the wrong information going out to the media negates the millions you've tried to develop your brand with. So it's the costs are probably multiples of the compliance. It can be, the fines themselves can be large. And if that gets to be common knowledge out on the street, that's going to affect your brand. So the costs multiply.
Also, with BJ is totally right. I will say the environmental cost. If you contaminate water or whatever with chemical waste, for instance, it comes to an environmental cost which we cannot put a price on.
Anyone else? Okay. What both of you have said actually answered two questions here: the hidden cost of non-compliance, and another question was, how does poor compliance impact brand trust and partnerships? As BJ has mentioned, you built a brand trust over years, and a non-compliance heard by anyone can just ruin that in seconds. It takes 2 seconds to break trust, but it takes years to build it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to another questions. What is one behavior in leadership that must change first to improve safety culture?
What is one behavior? In English, they have a saying that I just love it, and I never translated it. The monkey see, monkey do. And it's just the first, just love it. And always every time I just start working, the first one to go down with me is the plant manager. That goes with me. And another thing that I do is, before going to the operators or for the operators, yeah, I go with the leadership team. But first, the plant manager. For instance, I'm going to tell you this week, next week actually, nobody here uses the handrail, and it is in every industry you have been working, they have to use the handrail. But I'll never say anything to an operator. Not yet. I've been here for 2 months. No, I'm not going to say it yet. But the first one has to be the plant manager. The first one is me, but I do it all the time. The second one, the plant manager. As long, and I have this conversation with him, as long as you do it, then it's going to be the leadership team. Then the leadership team, then we go to the supervisor, but no other way around. And what has happened in the past is once the plant manager or whoever is the leader or the technical manager and the leadership teams supervisors, then 90% of the operators, they're already following the rules because as I said, monkey see, monkey do. I just have to, the 10% is just easy, just a little conversation and they just fall apart. But for me, it's lead by example, by exemplary. There is no other way that I know. That if you have other, please let me know. I'm taking notes.
No, I think you said it well. That leadership sets the tone, right? I mean, they have to walk the walk. If they don't believe in safety and they're just speaking it, the folks will recognize that and they're not going to want to follow those leaders. So they have to walk the walk on the floor and they have to set the tone for what they expect and what they will accept from a safety or environmental standpoint. So, absolutely.
I agree with you, and that's a phrase I also really like to use, monkey see, monkey do. So our last question of the day is, what are the common gaps you see between SDS availability and actual employee awareness or training?
Well, I'll
Anyone?
tell you from a historical standpoint, when it was called an MSDS, especially in the United States, you were lucky to have enough information to have meaningful data to use at the beginning. And everything was analog and had to be updated every year. And now we've got these websites that give you SDSs that are up to date. We were lucky if we had enough data to be useful 15, 20 years ago. Now, the whole process is data driven and there's a bunch of information, but the regulatory framework around it is changing. So you have to pay attention. One SDS will not work across the globe. It won't do it. So you have to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the local regulatory environment and then taking that information and making sure it's imparted to the employees. Because if without that information transfer, they're not getting adequate protection.
For me, well, I have in here a very strong opinion about the safety data sheets. It's just they are too generic. Sometimes they go to the, oh my gosh. I try to read them. I tell, oh, this is the legislation says the manufacturer or producer has to give instruction and clear risks, and we call it here prudent or prudential or precaution phrases. Phrases, yeah, safety pressure and what to do. But they're too generic, and I'm like, all right, what do I do with this? And then how I do transmit it to the worker. Sometimes I call the producer. Sometimes I have done it. I have called the chemical guy and I say, oh, your safety data sheet says this, and they say yes, and it's up to you. That the safety sheet I have read it is the criteria that I choose, and I say, but you are giving me, I don't know, the number 7 is what I see the precaution or what to do, and it is too generic, and I call them, this, I have this problem. I say, oh, it's up to you. You decide it, but it is not. I probably Hans will help me with that. It's too generic for me, so I have to decide it myself. The producer is not helping me, not in the way that I would love. It is sad, but it is the true safety data sheet is too generic because they are I don't know, because they have to follow some legislation. So I some instructions that I have to do it myself for the employee. I don't know, Andrew, Hans, giving if I am wrong, please help me.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that, because the SDSs, they become way too long for how should I say, on the chemical operators to handle them themselves. The SDS may be 20, 30, 40 pages, depending on if it's an exposure scenario included in it. So we've seen previous documentation related to handling chemicals saying that workers should always print out and include the SDS with them while they're working with the chemicals. But if you're working with 3, 4, 5, 6 chemicals, then you compile pages and pages of chemical data you won't be able to handle. So I totally agree with you. So structuring chemical data in more easier understandable ways, as in creating risk reports or safety summaries or emergency response cards or similar kind of documentation, to make it as simple as possible for those that actually handle the chemicals. That's very important. And if you're able to, you can use pads, your mobile phones or iPads or anything to show this information as well. So that's also interesting, going into that kind of information communication.
I agree.
I agree, but so one thing I would like to say about when SDSs have become long, we do have platforms that support questions in SDSs through AI. With you can just ask the question like, I would like to know what's in section 3, and an AI could answer it for you. That's one specialty that where I work for, SDS Manager has to make these things like what Juan had said, these scenarios easier for people to not go through the whole safety data sheet, but to just ask a question related to that safety data sheet or a certain part, and that can be answered. This is where, let's say that what we spoke about before, AI and tech come into play, that some things they do help making it easier. I'm sure Andrew has used our platform and would agree here.
Well, absolutely. SDS Manager has been a game changer for us. The simplicity, and love the electronic storage. So could not endorse or recommend anymore. It's been very helpful for us across the globe.
Thank you. So we're closing the webinar right now. Here are the takeaways we want our audience to leave with going into 2026. Firstly, to not treat change as a temporary fix, build a system that handles updates at any time. All of our panelists have emphasized on that on every question, and when they've mentioned it in every one of their experiences. PFAs and CMR are moving fast. To start with visibility and ownership, plan around recurring reporting cycles and internal milestones. Prepare for audits by improving the evidence trail, not just the policy. And of course, proactive beats reactive every time. Thank you, Hans, Andrew, Juan, and Vijay for joining us. And thanks to everyone who has attended this webinar. You can find a recorded session of this webinar on our YouTube channel. Until next time, stay compliant, stay proactive, and stay safe. Thank you.